They thought we were primitive, arrogant. Little empire, sitting atop its 10,000 world throne, judging from afar with their long faces and longer lives. They measured worth in genetics, in lineage, in how many stars bowed when their warships passed, and to them we humans were nothing but a footnote, another species with primitive instincts and short tempers. They made a mistake. No. They made the mistake. It started like most things in the galaxy did, with a border skirmish. One of their scouting fleets crossed into human-settled space. Not a full invasion, not yet, just a show of strength. The Empire liked to test before it crushed. The aliens, who called themselves the Sahari Dominion, fired warning shots at one of our outer colonies. Minimal casualties, one child dead. The Empire expected negotiations. Instead, Earth went silent. No broadcast, no diplomacy, no retaliation. They thought we were afraid. Then 72 hours later, everything changed. The Fleet of Vengeance, no fancy name, just a blunt truth, emerged from hyperspace. Led by Admiral Ward, a man known more for silence than ceremony. The humans struck back, not with warnings, not with words, but with fire. 5 Empire-held planets were erased in less than a week. Cities turned to glass. Communication hubs melted. No demands. No speeches, just silence and ash. The Sahari were confused, not afraid yet. Just confused. They sent a diplomatic envoy. We never answered. They sent a second fleet. It never returned. They started to worry. I remember the moment. It hit them, really hit them, that humans weren't like the others. I was there, embedded with Imperial command, watching through a reinforced observation deck as their capital world Serge screamed into fire. They had defenses, shields that could hold back solar flares, cannons that fired at relativistic speeds. A fleet 3,000 strong. Didn't matter, because humans didn't come to fight. They came to end it. They dropped black pods from orbit, tens of thousands, not bombs, not drones, men biologically enhanced, gene-edited, trained in virtual warfare simulators from the A of 4, emotionally suppressed, no fear, no hesitation. The Sahari had never seen a war fought like this. Their soldiers broke in the first hour, not from wounds, from what they saw. Because human soldiers didn't fight fair. They didn't fight with honor. They didn't stop when the enemy begged. They didn't spare children if the child held a weapon. They didn't negotiate. They cleared city by city, block by block, like exterminators. I watched one soldier, helmet cracked, bleeding from the neck, drag himself through fire to throw a last grenade into a command tent. Then he died. No last words, no rage, no regret, just mission completed. The Sahari didn't understand. They believed war was politics by other means, an elegant dance, a chess board. But humans don't play chess in war. They flip the board, burn the pieces, and choke the player. Across from them, I asked one of their officers once, back when I still thought they could be reasoned with, "Why are you doing this?" He looked at me with eyes that didn't blink. "Because you touched one of our kids." The Sahari had never seen a war unravel this fast. By day 5 of the human retaliation, over a dozen worlds were lost, not contested, not under siege. Lost in full, siege, their jewel world. Their seat of culture, politics, and pride was now a burning carcass in space. Black smoke spiraled into orbit like a funeral pea the size of a moon. Millions dead, billions displaced, and yet Earth had still issued no demands. No ceasefire, no transmission of any kind. The message was in the silence. It was in the way their warships emerged from nothing and dissolved entire fleets. In seconds. In the precision of their ground. Invasions, no prisoners, no mistakes, no mercy, only annihilation. What the Sahari didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that humanity had never built its warriors for wars, it had built them for endings. Admiral Ward stood at the center of Command Deck Theta, high above the orbit of what used to be the Sahari's 5th military outpost. His uniform was black. Not for show, not for fear, just function, heat-resistant, armor-laced. And simple. Everything about him was stripped of decoration, even his voice. He didn't bark orders, he didn't give speeches, he gave results. Planetfall in T-minus 2 minutes, came a voice from below. Ward nodded once. No theatrics, no grand strategy meeting. He turned to his second, Colonel Bryce, another man who barely spoke, tall, scarred, blunt. They had served together during the fall of Europa, back when humanity was still fighting itself. "You prep the squads?" Ward asked. "All 12, no hesitation, no survivors." Ward said, "Never are." They both turned back to the digital projection that hung in the air before them, a live 3D scan of the Sahari's last bastion, the final major military complex outside the core. Worlds, underground bunkers, orbital cannons, 3 air support fleets, all of it ready for a final stand, the kind of fight that humans didn't believe in. Meanwhile, below on the dropship Hammer 9, Sergeant Trent checked his gear. Silence. Around him, his unit sat quietly, hands on weapons, eyes forward. No one joked, no one hyped themselves up. They didn't need to. They were bred for this. Genetically modified from birth, each soldier had spent their childhood in simulations where death was constant and morality was optional, empathy was not removed, it was redirected. Every time a fellow soldier fell, their instinct wasn't sorrow, it was vengeance. The pod trembled as it pierced atmosphere. Sergeant Trent looked across the hold and locked eyes with recruit Dawson, the youngest in the unit, only 19, barely grown into his enhancements. "Scared?" Trent asked flatly. Dawson shook his head, but his grip on the rifle said otherwise. "You should be." Trent said, "That's the only thing keeping you alive." Then the pod hit ground like a sledgehammer. The first 5 minutes were slaughter, not a battle, slaughter. Sorry defenses tried their cannons, roared their shock troopers, all polished armor and elegant tactics, deployed in perfect formation, but against human ground forces it was like throwing paper at a grinder. The Sahari fought like soldiers, humans fought like a virus. They came from below, above, behind. They didn't follow formations. They didn't wait for the perfect shot. They overwhelmed, swarmed, flanked, tunneled. By minute 6 the outer bunkers were gone. By minute 12 the first command node was reduced to rubble. By minute 20 the Sahari troops started to retreat, not strategically, not under order. They ran. That was their final mistake. Inside the Imperial War Chamber on the core world, Nerali, Emperor Thalavan watched the live feed through trembling fingers. His advisors muttered statistics around him, casualty charts, fleet losses, resource drains, planet counts. None of it mattered. He had never seen humans before this war, only heard of them. They unevolved species, the mammals who play At space faring, he remembered the council laughing when the first reports came in. One colony destroyed, one cruiser lost. Savages with luck, they weren't laughing anymore. His lead advisor, Chancellor Rathan, stepped forward, pale and trembling. Your Excellency, they've breached the third containment line. We must consider offering surrender terms. Thalavan turned slow and cold. To animals, no sir, Rathan whispered. To predators. But it was already too late for diplomacy. Earth didn't want peace. It didn't want territory. It didn't even want dominance. It wanted justice. Because when they killed that child during the skirmish, they didn't just break a treaty, they awakened a blood oath. Back on the battlefield, Sergeant Trent stepped over a fallen Sahari officer. The alien's long silver body was still twitching, eyes wide in disbelief. He had probably commanded hundreds, maybe thousands, a decorated war hero, now just meat in the mud. Trent raised his rifle and fired one more round into the skull. Clean. Final. He didn't pause, just kept walking ahead. His team was already storming the central fortress. Explosions lit the sky, and smoke choked the horizon. Human drop ships were still raining from the clouds, hundreds more soldiers joining the purge. From orbit, Admiral Ward watched the feed, unblinking. Status, he said, main bunker compromised, full ground dominance in T-minus 40 minutes, 0 civilian resistance. Execute protocol, clean sweep. Ward ordered, wipe all infrastructure. No trace. Yes sir. He turned to Bryce. Next target. Bryce pointed to a red blinking system across the projection. To Valor. Population 6.3 billion. Ward nodded. Burn it, no debate, no hesitation. Because Earth didn't believe in occupation, they believed in closure. Far across the stars, in hidden corners of the galaxy, other empires watched in silence. Observers from the Zur Pact, the Thorian Combine, even the insectoid hive-born species who once mocked humanity now rerouted their ships away from human territory, because what they saw wasn't war. It was extermination. With surgical precision, as if humanity had been waiting for centuries for an excuse to unleash its true nature. One Zeral scientist recorded in her journal, humanity's greatest threat is not their numbers, it's not their weapons, it's that they feel nothing when they kill. And yet what's worse is that when one of their own dies, they feel everything. On the edge of the battlefield, recruit Dawson knelt beside a fallen comrade. Private Ulan killed by shrapnel. He hadn't screamed, he had just fallen forward mid-sprint, neck open. Dawson stared at the body. His hands were shaking. He wasn't ready. This wasn't a game. Sergeant Trent walked up beside him, looked down, then crouched. You freeze again like that, he said, voice calm. I'll shoot you myself, understand? Dawson didn't speak. Trent leaned closer. You think this is war? You think this is about pride or politics or Earth flying flags over burned capitals? He pulled the kid by the collar. This is about reminders. You kill one of ours, we kill all of yours. Then he stood, shouldered his rifle, and marched forward. Dawson stood slowly and followed. In the aftermath of the siege, there were no celebrations. Human soldiers didn't cheer, didn't loot, didn't plant flags. They gathered the bodies, burned everything, and moved on to the next world. Admiral Ward's final report to High Command was 13 words: tactical sweep complete, minimal losses, no Resistance. Tavel assault begins in 36 hours. That was it. No glory, no ceremony, just numbers, just cold, brutal closure. Because humans didn't wage war to win, they waged it to end the possibility of it ever happening again, and the galaxy finally understood the truth. They didn't fear humanity because they were violent, they feared them because they were so good at it, so clean, so fast, so final, and far above the charred surface of Sarin-Kesh, orbiting the blackened ruins of what was once the heart of a proud empire. A lone message was found etched into the side of a ruined satellite by a laser torch. It read, "We don't start wars, we just finish them. Earth didn't always look like this, not always cold, not always gray, not always efficient. There were once songs in the streets, firesides, laughing children on summer grass, before the silence, before the killing fields shaped the soil, before the great collapse." That was what historians called it, a polite phrase, sterile and academic, for a century of global starvation, tribal warfare, and economic suffocation. There were no victors, just survivors. And even they didn't call themselves that. They called themselves the last generation, because after them Earth changed. It had to. What rose from those ashes wasn't a nation, not a republic, not a council. It was a directive, a single idea forged in blood and necessity. We will never be prey again. That wasn't a mission statement. It wasn't printed on flags. It was whispered, burned into DNA, drilled into children from the moment they could speak. The Earth didn't unite. It was forced into singularity by starvation and fear. Borders vanished not because of peace, but because they became irrelevant. What difference did a country make when the oceans were black and the sky burned with solar storms? By the time first contact with alien life came centuries later, Earth wasn't curious, it was cautious. They sent diplomats first. Of course they did. The Sahari Dominion arrived in radiant vessels that shimmered like liquid glass, their envoys tall and elegant, speaking in synthesized perfection. They bowed, they smiled, they praised Earth's resilience. They offered trade, knowledge, protection, and Earth patient, silent. Earth listened, but it didn't speak. Not yet. It watched, it learned, it counted. The Dominion didn't realize the mistake they'd made. They showed Earth their hierarchy, their caste system, how other alien species were ruled, not allied, how power was measured in obedience. Earth saw the cracks and prepared. The mistake came 2 decades later when a Sahari border patrol fired on a human colony over a mining claim. 5 dead, one of them a child. That's when the countdown ended. You don't build monsters in a day, you breed them, and Earth had become very good at breeding. The man known as General Holtz was the architect of Earth's retaliation doctrine. He never raised his voice, never smiled. He wore the same gray uniform every day. Until his death, he didn't see nations. He didn't see morality. He saw patterns of threat, of betrayal, of weakness. He once wrote, "War is not waged by the angry, it is won by the prepared." Emotions are a luxury. We had ours. It cost us everything. Holtz erased empathy from military doctrine, not because he hated it, but because he understood what it cost. In the face of extinction, his soldiers were trained to feel, yes, but only for their own, never for the enemy. He wrote, "We do not grieve them, we do not honor them, we erase them." Back in orbit over Saharan-Kesh, a quiet Transmission pulsed from the warship. Vigil, not to the Sahari, not to the galaxy, to Earth, Admiral Ward stood as. It broadcast, Operation Eclipse. Complete, full system submission. Civilian population neutralized. Military presence eliminated, awaiting. Final protocol authorization for TVA. Core. The response came in just 2 words. Proceed clean. But back on Earth in a silent, underground chamber beneath what used to be the Himalayas, the real work was being done thousands of meters below ground in a reinforced complex known only as foundation lived the people who mattered most, the architects. No rank, no politics, just control. These were the minds behind Earth's ascent, men like Dr. Elrich Vaughn, thin grade, spoken one-word sentences. He never saw battlefield, never held a rifle, but he built the neural inhibitors that allowed soldiers to kill without hesitation. His son died in the collapse. He never cried. He just wrote, "We can't afford grief until the threats are extinct." And they weren't extinct yet. Above ground, Earth had no cities anymore. Just zones, sectors, no megacities. Glowing with life, only functionality. Cold, clean towers, minimal energy. Waste, no entertainment broadcasts, no political debates, just discipline. There was laughter sometimes in homes, between families, but it was quiet. Private, because Earth wasn't a culture. It was a warning. On Tavel Core, the Empire's final industrial planet, the Sahari made their last desperate attempt at resistance. They broadcast surrender. They raised white signals. They opened their gates. They begged, and Earth ignored it because Earth had learned long ago what the Dominion still hadn't. Mercy invited memory. Memory invited revenge. Revenge reignited war. So Earth didn't show mercy. They scrubbed city by city, factory by factory. One satellite image showed a sprawling metropolis, teeming with billions. The next showed dust. No command, no heroic speeches, no propaganda, just protocol. A single sorry child was found hiding in the ruins of Kathra City, 9 years old, bloodied, alone, crying. He was brought before a human field commander for processing. The soldier scanned him, detected no weapons, no threats, then shot him in the head. Squad moved on. No anger, no joy, just completion. In the Galactic Council, what was left of it, panic began to spread. The humans weren't invading. They weren't occupying. They weren't building outposts or sending diplomats. They were removing not just the Sahari, but everything connected to them. Sympathizers, trade partners, even academic institutions that shared Dominion philosophies. One by one, their moons went silent and Earth never blinked. Admiral Ward sat alone in his quarters. He had killed more sentient beings than any man alive. Entire star systems wiped under his orders, and yet he remembered every name of the fallen human soldiers. Under his command, he had a list. 172 names, faces, ages. He didn't cry. He just read them once a night, because Earth allowed mourning, but only for their own. When the Dominion officially collapsed, it didn't fall with a war. It fell with a silence. No more broadcasts, no more fleets, just nothing. Their last remaining transmission, picked up by dozens of border satellites, was shaky, screamed in 7 languages. They're not conquerors, they're not warriors, they're executioners. Earth didn't celebrate, it updated. The AI core beneath Foundation simply processed the collapse of the Dominion as a new file, status neutralized. Next objective, assessment in progress. That was it, because Earth wasn't trying to win the galaxy, it was trying to clean it, and across the stars in the dark corners of space, whispers spread. You don't want Earth's attention. You don't want Earth's justice. You don't want Earth to care, because when humans care, you disappear. The Dominion was gone. That fact alone shook the galaxy more than any supernova or plague in recorded history, not because of grief. Few mourned the Sahari, their arrogance had made them enemies everywhere. But what terrified the galaxy was how fast it happened. 14 planets, 4 major military fleets, entire bloodlines that had ruled for millennia, erased weeks, and the humans never even broadcasted a reason. No demands, no new government, no resource extraction, just obliteration. That silence was deafening, and now in the shadow of the burning Sahari ruins, the others began to panic. The meeting was unofficial. The Galactic Council no longer existed. Not really. Too many members had gone dark. Too many satellites destroyed. Too many neutral systems that quietly backed the Dominion had vanished without explanation. What remained of the Council now huddled in secrecy on a hidden moon known as Tiscal 8, orbiting a brown dwarf in uncharted space, the only safe place left. 8 species sat around a table in the underground bunker. 8 species that had never agreed on anything until now. They were all terrified of Earth. Not afraid, terrified. The kind that kept you from sleeping, that made you watch the stars in silence, waiting for a black warship to appear without warning. And they all knew something Earth had refused to confirm. The killing wasn't over. High Chancellor Urith of the Valari Ascendancy was the first to speak. He was tall-scaled and usually smug until recently. He now looked like a man trying not to vomit every time he opened his mouth. They are not conquerors, he said, voice low. They don't plant flags. They don't build colonies. They remove everything, every trace, every whisper. General Tran of the Vakari clan slammed a mechanical fist against the table. We should have hit them first. We watched the Sahari fall like fools, convinced Earth would stop. Urith stared. They don't stop. That's the problem. You think this ends with the Dominion. It doesn't. It ends when Earth decides they've cleaned enough. And by then, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. A representative of the Asura collective clicked her mandibles. Then we strike while they are still weakened. Another scoffed. Weak, said Counselor Dash of the Trelni Pact, his voice trembling. They destroyed a battle fleet with a gravity weapon we still can't reverse. Engineer. Their soldiers don't feel pain. They don't flee. They don't rest. What weakness are you referring to? The fact they haven't reached us yet. Silence. Then Chancellor Urith leaned forward and spoke the words none of them wanted to say out loud. We're not forming a defense. We're forming a delay. Meanwhile, Earth already knew the meeting was happening. They knew everything. In orbit above a dead moon, 1 sector over, a stealth drone recorded the transmission. The AI relayed it back to Foundation, the central data core on Earth. Dr. Swords. Elrich Vaughn read the transcript with cold interest. Resistance forming. He muttered, more to himself than to the others in the observation room. Cross species coordination, primitive but not unexpected. His assistant, a woman with no name, badge and no social ID, asked the Obvious question, should we act? Elrich didn't answer for several seconds, then not yet. Why not? He tapped the glass screen. Because now they're afraid, let them. Waste energy on desperation, then we end them faster. Back on Escale 8, the 8 terrified leaders made the only decision left, a preemptive coalition. Strike every remaining fleet. Valari, Vickery, TRNY, Isra, and the others would combine over 12,000 ships, nearly 2 million troops, all for one goal. Invade Earth, kill the core, end the virus. They called it Operation Salvation. What they didn't know was that Earth had already run simulations on this move, thousands of them, and Earth had already won. Colonel Bryce received the report first. He stood aboard the Dirge, Earth's high orbit command cruiser, staring out into the stars as the AI read the intercepted messages aloud. Operation code name Salvation, joint fleet en route in 9 days. Initial objective, orbital breach. He didn't even blink, he just tapped his comms. Admiral Ward, he said calmly, they're coming. Ward's voice answered in seconds. Expected protocols. Ward didn't hesitate. We burned their hope first. Back on Earth, Project Ashfall was activated, a network of black satellites positioned across the outer systems, each capable of emitting a planet silencing pulse, a weapon that didn't destroy planets but minds. Neural disruption, targeted toward command species, not meant for war, meant for collapse. 1 week later, as the coalition's mega fleet approached Earth's solar system, 6 of their core planets went silent. No explosions, no smoke, just empty signals. Commanders screaming into comms that no one was answering. Cities found without movement, ships floating with crews brain dead in their chairs. Not dead, not alive, just empty. Operation Salvation died before it ever reached Earth's orbit. In the command deck of the Valari flagship, General Corps watched as report after report confirmed the worst. This isn't war, he whispered. His second-in-command gritted his teeth. What is it then? Corps stared at the hologram of Earth. It's a reset, but the humans hadn't even deployed yet. They were watching, waiting, because Earth had learned over centuries that its true power wasn't in speed, it was in psychological erosion. Make them think they had a chance, make them plan, make them hope, and then take it. Inside Foundation, Elrich Vaughn watched the live data feeds of the collapsing coalition. He smiled, a rare ghost thin smile. Why do they always assume we want peace? He asked aloud. No one answered. No one ever did. War was already over. They just hadn't realized it yet. By the time Earth's retaliation ended, the Dominion and Project Ashfall silenced the heart of the coalition. The galaxy had fractured beyond repair. There were no treaties, no calls for diplomacy, no resistance cells left to sponsor. What remained were pockets, small, isolated governments on the edge of the known star systems, silent, hiding, watching, each one asking the same question: are we next? And the answer was always the same: yes. On the mineral-rich moon of then 5N, outpost belonging to the Marikay enclave, the last High Council gathered in darkness. Their leader, Commander Drell, wasn't a politician. He wasn't bred for grand speeches or flag-waving. He was a former soldier, scarred, eyeless on one side, fingers replaced with carbon prosthetics, a man who had seen the fall of the vicar firsthand, and he knew exactly what was coming. The room was silent. 10 other leaders sat at the round table. No one dared speak first. They were all thinking the same thing. Drell broke the silence. They won't offer terms. The woman beside him, an elder diplomat. From the Asura side, they have to know. Species wants to exterminate an entire galaxy. Drell turned toward her with his dead eye. Humans aren't a species anymore. They're a response. She didn't reply. He continued, voice low and raw. They don't take prisoners. They don't rebuild. They don't occupy. They erase. You kill one of theirs, they erase everything connected to you. Systems, cultures, bloodlines, history. It's not war, it's memory removal. Another leader, voice shaking, asked. Then what do we do? Drell gave the only honest answer left. We die loud. For 2 weeks the remaining enclaves and fringe species scouted Earth's defenses. They poured their last credits into old stealth ships. They reactivated mothballed nuclear engines. They sharpened ancient war protocols written long before Earth even knew of space flight. This mission had no name. It had no propaganda, no broadcasted threat, no suicide chant, because they weren't doing this to win. They were doing it to remind Earth that even the doomed can hurt. The plan was simple: breach Earth's outer defense satellites, get one ship into the upper atmosphere, detonate the war core, leave a scar, just one. They didn't even believe it would work. They just wanted to be remembered. Back in Foundation, Earth had already seen it coming. AI intercepts tracked the movement of the Ghost Fleet hours before it launched, but strangely no ships moved to intercept. No warning shots, no retaliation. Elrich Vaughn stood in silence as the alert scrolled across the wall. Unidentified microfleet detected. Trajectory earthbound. ETA 96 minutes. A junior analyst turned to him. Authorization to deploy orbital drones. Elrich didn't respond. The analyst asked again, softer. Still no reply. Finally Elrich said, let them come. In low orbit aboard the command ship Harbinger 1, Admiral Ward monitored the incoming fleet on a hollow screen. 12 ships, scattered formation. Oh, technology, no support fleet. They weren't trying to survive. They were trying to make a statement. He turned to Colonel Bryce. They'll breach low orbit if we don't fire, Bryce noted. Ward nodded slowly. I know why. Let them. Ward looked at the Earth spinning slowly beneath them, peaceful, cold, clean, because the galaxy needs to believe they had a choice, he said, even if it's a lie. Commander Drell stood aboard the bridge of the Ravager, the lead ship of the Ghost Fleet. Every part of the interior shook. The ship wasn't built for speed anymore. It was held together by loyalty and hate. They were less than 20 minutes from the planet. Status on rear escorts, he barked. Destroyed 5 minutes ago. Direct hits. We're the only ship still functional. Drill nodded. They're letting us through. No one responded. Everyone knew this wasn't a mission. It was a funeral with rockets. Back on Earth, the civilians didn't even know what was coming. They weren't warned. There was no alarm because Earth didn't do panic anymore. Not for threats, only for failures. And this wouldn't be one. The Ravager broke through the mesosphere. The ship groaned as friction tore at the hull. Flames licked the edges. Console lights flickered. Half the crew was unconscious from the G-forces. Commander Drell was still standing, one eye blind, one hand gripping the ignition switch. 90 seconds to detonation. One shot, one Chance, that was all they ever had. Through the glass he saw Earth now not as an enemy, but as a mirror, a species that learned what fear could turn you into. He almost respected them, almost. 60 seconds, the console buzzed, a red alert, incoming transmission. It was from Earth, no encryption, no voice. Just a text, 4 words, this is your moment. Drell's eyes widened. He didn't understand. But he didn't have to. This was his death, and he wasn't going to waste it. 30 seconds, his hand hovered over the core, then nothing. The core didn't activate. Lights failed, power drained. The ship stopped, dead in mid-descent. Frozen core failure, someone whispered. It's offline, dead, everything's offline. Outside, the stars blinked, and then he saw them, hundreds of tiny black orbs, hovering in the sky like insects. Earth's null drones, not weapons, just watchers. The Ravager was gently pulled back into orbit silently, effortlessly. No explosion, no impact, no glory, just failure. Back on the Harbinger, Admiral Ward turned to Bryce. Will we execute them? Bryce paused, then said, they want to be martyrs. Ward nodded. So we don't kill them, then what? Ward stared at the flickering hologram of the ship. We leave them alive. We let them go. That's the punishment. Let the last warriors of a dying galaxy live long enough to see the rest of it die. Hours later, the Ravager was towed back beyond Earth's gravity well. Drell sat slumped in the captain's chair. No one spoke, no one cried. They had given everything, and Earth had returned nothing. The message was clear. You don't get to be remembered. You just disappear. Back on Earth, a child asked her father, did we win? The man shook his head gently. No, he said, we finished it. Why don't they speak? That was the one question the galaxy kept asking long after the fires stopped, long after the last fleets were disintegrated in orbit, long after every attempt at diplomacy died unanswered in the void. Why did Earth refuse to broadcast? No surrender accepted, no message of unity, no mission accomplished, just silence, clinical, surgical, brutal silence. Some believed it was pride. Others believed it was cruelty, but the truth, the real truth, was worse. Earth didn't speak because there was nothing left to say. Inside the mountain fortress known as Foundation, far beneath the crust of the Earth, Dr. Elrich Vaughn stood in front of a black wall of code stretching 60 ft high, not just a screen, a living stream of data, threat analyses, predictive models, war simulations, emotional pattern tracking, long-term species behavior. This was the archive, Earth's memory core. It didn't store history to remember. It stored it to analyze, to predict the next war before it started. Beside him stood Director Merrick, commander of Earth's Psychological Doctrine Division. A man with no military medals, no recorded birthday, and no civilian record, just results. The galaxy is broken, Merrick said. Van didn't look away from the screen. We didn't break it. We simply cleared the infection. Merrick and LT Unk and GT, eyes narrowed slightly. We were the infection once. No, Vaughn replied coldly. We were the host, and we learned what happens when you let parasites live too long. Earth's silence was not strategy, it was ideology, born from centuries of betrayal, abandonment, and pain. Earth's philosophers, if they could even be called that, developed one guiding principle: do not negotiate with tomorrow's knife. It was written into war doctrine, not as A motto as a law because Earth had learned something the rest of the galaxy still hadn't accepted. Everyone lies. Empires pretend to seek peace while preparing fleets. Coalitions shake hands while building bombs. Diplomats wear smiles while signing execution orders behind closed doors. So Earth stopped playing, stopped listening, stopped responding. The directive was simple. When attacked, do not retaliate. Eliminate. In a sealed room deep in foundations, Eastern Wing, Protocol Echo ran 24 hours a day. Its job to simulate potential futures based on patterns of species, behavior, political shifts, cultural changes, even emotional trends within leadership. It didn't simulate war, it simulated trust, and in every model, without exception, the same conclusion repeated: they will betray you again if not this generation, the next. So Earth made the only logical choice: end the possibility of future betrayal before it starts. That's why Earth didn't speak. Speaking opened a door. Even a whisper could plant a seed of hope, and hope always came back with teeth. Admiral Ward understood this better than anyone. He had once believed in diplomacy, decades ago when he still had the youth to imagine peace. He served under the old Earth Council before Foundation was fully operational, back when humans still tried to be like the others, civilized, collaborative, hopeful. He remembered the day it ended, the day a Sahari ambassador smiled, signed a treaty, drank Earth's wine, and gave the order to detonate a weapon in low orbit. As he left, over 3,000 human civilians died on a moon colony. Ward's wife among them. The Sahari denied responsibility, blamed rogue elements, promised an internal investigation. That was when Ward stopped speaking. He hadn't said a word to an alien since Colonel Bryce had never believed in diplomacy, not once. He was born after the collapse, grew up in one of the reclamation zones, cold gray towers, rationed food, death drills every morning. Children were taught history as a series of betrayals. They weren't taught how to live, they were taught how not to die. To him, Earth's silence wasn't cold, it was mercy. He once said, "The galaxy doesn't want peace, it wants permission to hurt you again later." We don't give that anymore. Still, not all humans agreed. There were voices, rare, hushed, who believed Earth had gone too far, that its silence had become dogma, that its purge protocol was no longer reaction, but addiction. One such voice belonged to Commander Ryan Thale, a decorated tactician and veteran of the Tavel Core siege. He had led the campaign that wiped 6.3 billion Sahari in under 36 hours. He'd done his job flawlessly, but it haunted him. In private logs recovered years later, he wrote, "I no longer see enemies, I see copies of us, desperate, arrogant, terrified. We killed them because they looked like the monsters we used to be, and maybe still are." He died in silence, his last message deleted. Foundation called him a malfunction. But maybe he wasn't wrong. Maybe Earth didn't speak anymore, not because it didn't trust the galaxy, but because it didn't trust itself. Back in the archive, Dr. Elrich Vaughn initiated a full historical playback, one of the last allowed within Foundation. He watched images flicker across the glass wall: a starving child in a bomb crater on Europa, the riots after the solar water collapse, the look in an old Earth general's eyes when he realized the AI he trusted had been sabotaged by an alien code base, the screams aboard the embassy ship, Parag moments before its engines exploded. A burned flag, a broken wedding ring, an empty classroom. That was the price Earth paid when it trusted, and trust was never free again. Someone once asked him on record why humans never offered peace terms. He had answered, because if you survive, you remember. So the silence remained. No speeches, no surrender negotiations, no monuments to the dead, only numbers, only protocols, only finality. And yet somewhere deep in the reclamation sectors, a child looked up at the stars and asked her teacher, "Will we ever talk to them again?" Teacher paused, then answered carefully, "Maybe one day, why not now?" The teacher's voice cracked just slightly. Because Earth isn't listening anymore. It's still remembering. It came from the edge of the dying zones, a tiny pulse in the dark, one encrypted frequency bouncing off a decommissioned Earth drone. It was weak, fragmented, barely intact, the kind of signal that any other world would have dismissed as static noise from a broken civilization. But Earth didn't ignore anything. The signal was flagged by a deep-core AI node in sector relay Z9 marked for anomalous linguistic patterns. It didn't contain coordinates. It didn't identify its origin. It didn't beg, but it said something no species had ever dared to say to Earth before. We were wrong. The signal was forwarded to Foundation. In silence, no alarms, no alerts, just blinking light on Dr. Elrich Vaughn's console. He stared at it for 17 seconds, then played the message. The voice that came through wasn't robotic, wasn't rehearsed. It cracked, trembled, rasped, like a man trying to speak through blood. My name was Lurk Vin, High Scholar of the Jatari Convergence before you burned us. A pause, not a dramatic one, just long enough to breathe, long enough to feel. I was not a soldier. I was a man who believed in our way of life. I believed in strength, in superiority, in the doctrine we'd inherited, and for that I gave silence when others screamed. I called for peace only when it served our benefit. I turned blind when we let the Sahari turn children into warnings. Another pause, this one longer, breathing slower now. You destroyed us thoroughly, completely. No graves, no monuments, no faces left to remember. And then quieter. You were right too. No one moved in the archive. 3 analysts stood frozen behind Elrich Vaughn, watching the playback with wide, dry eyes. No one had ever heard this kind of confession before. Not from a surviving species. Not from anyone. Most messages Earth intercepted were panicked, threatening, delusional. This was real. I speak not to plead, the voice continued. I speak because I'm the last. I scavenged an old beacon. You probably knew that, maybe even let me do it. A bitter chuckle. You don't fight wars. I've seen that now. You don't shout across battlefields. You remove the battlefield. You remove the reason. For one, that's what no one else understood. Another paused. But I do now. His voice shook hard now, barely holding together. We thought you were angry. We thought Earth was lashing out. But no, you weren't angry. You were tired. Tired of being lied to. Tired of burying your dead and listening to speeches over the ashes. Tired of trusting species like mine to be better next time than the words that no one expected to hear. Not from any alien. Not in 1,000 years. If I had what you had, I'd have done the same. Elrich Voss stood still. Behind him, Someone whispered, "It's a trick." Another said, "He's trying to humanize himself." But Vaughn wasn't listening to them. He was listening to the tone, the shame. And shame couldn't be forged. "I don't ask to be spared," Lurk said. "There's nothing left to spare. Jetari are gone. What remains is dust. Orbiting a star too tired to burn." He coughed rough wet, something in his chest had collapsed. "You won't respond. I know that, that's why I'm speaking. Not for mercy but for record." Then his voice dropped lower, almost inaudible. "There was a boy once, a Jita child. Raised in the temple sectors, he used to study human history, secretly against the law," he said. "Your kind was the only honest liars in the galaxy. I never understood what he meant, silence. But I do now. You lied about being civilized. You lied about being weak. You lied about needing alliances, but when it came to death, you never lied. You said, 'Touch one of ours and you'll see.'" Then a sound, metal falling, a chair scraping, breathing heavy and final. "I've seen it," a whisper, "and if there's any justice in whatever's left of the stars, I hope you see this." Transmission ended. Elrich didn't speak for 2 full minutes. Then he turned to the analysts. "Verify origin. Already triangulated one." Replied, "Dead moon, outer ring of sector 3412. No life signs remaining. Where was it sent from? Erected relay tower. Ancient Jetari era. Power core burned out less than 6 hours after transmission." "So he's dead?" "Yes, sir," another analyst spoke, hesitant. "Sir, do we archive this as hostile propaganda?" Elrich turned slowly. His face was cold, unreadable. Then he said something no one expected. "No, archive it under clarity." Clarity was a forbidden folder, not labeled classified, not marked in red. Just never used. It was created over century ago when Earth's directive was finalized, meant to house any moment, any truth that didn't align with policy, but deserved to exist anyway. Until now, it had always been empty. Lurk Viven's confession became the first entry. Back in orbit, Admiral Ward received the decrypted copy. He read it alone 3 times, then deleted it from his private system. He never spoke of it, but he never initiated another offensive protocol either. And far below, on the surface of Earth, in a quiet residential zone near the Pacific Restoration Belt, a man watched the sunrise and whispered to himself, "Maybe it's enough now." But Earth didn't stop, it just slowed. The galaxy, for the first time in living memory, was silent. No alliances, no wars, no invasions, just stillness, like prey hiding in the brush, hoping the predator had eaten its fill. And for the first time, Earth listened not to messages, not to please, but to itself, to the guilt festering in the souls of its own soldiers, to the unease creeping into its architects, to the unspoken question now forming in every corridor of foundation. What do we become when there's nothing left to kill? Earth had never imagined peace. Not real peace, not this long, haunting stillness that echoed through the stars like the aftermath of a massacre. It was a silence that didn't feel like victory. It felt like an unfinished sentence, like someone had screamed at the sky and never stopped, only to find that there was no one left to hear it. The stars, once burning with movement, war fleets, patrols, evacuations, now stood still, cold, distant. Galactic space had become a graveyard, and Earth had become its undertaker. Inside Foundation, The command lights dimmed every evening like clockwork. Data still moved, probes still mapped. The void, AI systems still scanned the known systems for any new spark of hostility, but they found nothing. No hidden colonies, no uprising, no secret fleets, just empty planets, dead moons, silent frequencies, a galaxy that had taken Earth's warning and listened. And so the war engine began to slow, not shut down, just drift like a soldier who kept marching even when the gunfire stopped, because stopping would mean realizing you don't know where you are anymore. Dr. Bream Elrich von sat alone in the clarity room, a chamber that hadn't existed publicly until the message from Lurk Van. It was built in. Secret, quiet, unofficial, just a metal desk, a screen, and a room with no windows. The message played again. He didn't cry. Humans didn't cry anymore. Not often. The gene mod programs had neutralized emotional volatility decades ago, but Vaughn felt something. Something deeper. Something worse than guilt, aimlessness. The voice of a dying alien confessing the truth, begging for nothing, had done more damage to Earth's doctrine than any fleet, because it reflected. And Earth hadn't seen a reflection in centuries. Outside the central city walls, Colonel Bryce patrolled the edge of the reclamation zone. The walls weren't meant to keep people in, they were meant to keep memories out. This was where the soil still bore scorch marks from orbital strikes, where the air tasted faintly of ash and trees struggled to grow straight, where thousands of civilians had once lived before Earth turned inwards, militarized, and restructured society into the directive. Here nothing moved, nothing spoke, but Bryce kept walking it every day, boots crunching over gravel that hadn't been swept in years. He didn't know why. Maybe part of him hoped a new threat would appear, some final enemy that had slept through the purge and would rise for a proper ending. But no one came. There were no more empires, no more alliances, no more enemies, just Earth looking at itself. Admiral Ward stood aboard the Dirge, the last warship still on high orbit duty. Most of the fleet had returned. Many were docked in deep storage beneath oceans or buried in ice vaults near Mars, but the Dirge remained, not as a weapon, as a reminder. He stood on the bridge alone, watching Earth rotate below him. Peaceful, clean, sterile. It looked perfect. It felt dead. He remembered his wife's face, what little of it the fire hadn't taken. He remembered the sound of her breath as the colony alarms failed, the heat ripping through walls. That was what he'd fought for, her memory. But now even the memory felt quiet, because no one was left to hate. And without hate, what did justice become? In civilian districts, the next generation began to ask questions no one had asked in 100 years. Children born into silence, into perfection, into a world without war or laughter or failure. They were raised by emotion-stable parents, schooled in doctrine, fed by efficiency. But still they asked, why don't we talk to anyone? What was it like before the silence? Are we the only ones left? And worst of all, was it worth it? Some parents answered honestly. Some changed the subject. Some just turned off the lights and went to bed early. But the questions didn't go away. In a quiet mountain village rebuilt from the ashes of the old Europe zones, a man named Kellen, a former engineer no longer active, sat in front of a campfire. His son sat beside him, watching the flames. They hadn't said anything for 20 minutes. Then the boy asked, "Is the war really over?" Kellen stared into the fire. "There's no one left to fight, but if we're the last, doesn't that make us?" He hesitated. "What, the bad ones?" Kellen didn't answer. He couldn't. Inside Foundation, the central AI known only as Reach began running new simulations, not war models, not threat assessment, but civil stability models. Because for the first time since Directive Zero, unrest patterns began to rise slightly, slowly but consistently. A 0.7% rise in noncompliance, a 1.2% rise in archival access outside approved hours, children asking restricted questions, low-level operatives pausing before executing purge commands, 1,000 cracks invisible to the eye. But growing. Reach flagged it, label containment at risk, directive unknown. Because the system had never planned for a world without war. Dr. Elrich Vaughn stood before the Central Council 3 weeks later, a room of the highest ranking officers, tacticians, and legacy minds that had built Earth's silence. He stood calmly, hands folded, voice even. "There is no external threat," they nodded, "but there is a fracture forming inside." Silence. "I recommend we alter the directive." Murmurs. "What are you proposing?" someone asked. Vaughn took a slow breath. "We speak once, not to threaten, not to demand, not to dominate, but to say we are still here, we are listening, we want to know if anyone else is left." One of the generals leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "That sounds dangerously close to diplomacy." "No," Vaughn said, "it's not an offer. It's not a plea, it's just a signal." Another voice, harsher, "A signal invites answers." Van looked around the room, letting the silence settle, then said, "Maybe that's what we need, an answer, even if it's just a no. We're not talking to a graveyard." The vote passed by one voice. Ward voted yes, Bryce voted no. Reach abstained. The next morning, Earth sent its first transmission in 127 years. It wasn't a speech, it wasn't even a sentence, just 4 words broadcast in every known frequency, sent once, then never again. "We are still listening." There was no immediate response, no lights in the dark, no returning signals, no fleets, no messages, just stars, still cold, still silent. But maybe, just maybe, not dead. In the months that followed, Earth didn't change much, but it changed enough. The silence was no longer doctrine, it was a choice, and now so was everything else. Admiral Ward stepped off the dirge for the last time. He didn't speak, didn't look back. The ship would remain docked, just in case, but for now he wanted to walk without armor, to breathe air that hadn't been filtered through warship steel. Colonel Bryce returned to the reclamation zone, not to patrol but to dig. He unearthed a tree stump where his family's home once stood. He sat there for hours, no rifle, no comms, just memories. Children in restoration schools were finally allowed to learn about the collapse, about the betrayal, but also about the hope that once existed before the collapse. That hope now returned quietly, not to undo the past, but to ask, what do we do now that we've survived? Earth had ended the war, but survival, that was just beginning.